The cold of the marble floor seeped through the thin soles of my heels, a chilling reality check in the gilded cage of the Halcyon Crown's restroom. Outside this soundproofed sanctuary, the elite of Greybridge were clinking glasses and writing checks, blissfully unaware of the silent war being waged in their hallways. My war. I pressed my back against the stall door, the polished wood doing little to soothe the frantic tremor running through my body. My breath came in shallow, useless gasps, each one a betrayal that threatened to echo in the cavernous silence. In my hand, I clutched a small, black USB drive, its plastic casing slick with the sweat from my palm. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the names and lives of hundreds of families, each one a line item in a ledger of calculated cruelty. A ghost of a blue ink smear stained my wrist, a faint, accusing smudge from the classified stamp I'd used just an hour ago. It felt like a brand, marking me as a thief, or maybe, if I was lucky, a savior. Beyond the door, the muted symphony of the charity gala was punctuated by a sharper, more menacing sound, the rhythmic, heavy tread of polished leather on stone. Compact Shield. The name sounded like something you'd find on a box of cheap electronics, but their methods were anything but. They were the private army of the city's financial predators, and right now, they were hunting. Each footfall was a hammer blow against my ribs, squeezing the air from my lungs. They were systematic, sweeping the guest areas, their movements betraying a confidence that they would find who they were looking for. Me. My phone vibrated against my thigh, a sudden, violent buzz that made me jump. I fumbled it out of the small clutch I carried, my fingers clumsy and numb. A new message from an unknown number glowed on the screen. "Go to the mixology bar, say Black Mint, they'll help." My heart seized. A trap. It had to be. The same person who had whispered the tip about the open server at the silent auction, the same person who had conveniently left their credentials logged in, was now offering me an escape route. It was a perfectly laid snare, designed to corner me, to make me run right into their hands. I couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust anyone. I slid down to the floor, my gown pooling around me like a silken shroud. I was Noor Avalos, 26 years old, an intake clerk at the Riverlight Housing Support Center. My job was to listen to stories of hardship, to file paperwork, to offer a tissue and a sad, sympathetic smile while the gears of a broken system ground people into dust. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't a hero. But when I saw the pattern, the forged eviction notices, the fake judicial stamps, the families disappearing from homes they'd lived in for generations, I couldn't unsee it. And now, the data, proving Sable Meridian's network of fraudulent displacement, was burning a hole in my hand. The footsteps were closer now, just outside the main restroom door. A man's voice, clipped and impatient, barked an order. They were checking every room. My time was up. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing the face of Mrs. Gable, her tears tracing paths through the wrinkles on her cheeks as she told me how they'd given her 10 minutes to pack a lifetime into a single cardboard box. I had promised her I would do something. This was my something, a stupid, reckless, and likely fatal something. Then, a new sound cut through my panic. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the aggressive banging of security. These were 3 distinct measured raps against the stall door itself. Low, patient, and impossibly close. I held my breath, my blood turning to ice. A voice followed, as quiet and steady as the knocks. It was a man's voice, a low baritone that seemed to absorb the sound around it. A calm anchor in my storm of fear. "Open the door," he said. There was no command in it. Just a statement of fact. "You're safe with me." I stayed frozen, my mind reeling. Who was he? How did he know I was in here? The guards outside were an obvious threat, a blunt instrument, and this was something else, something sharper. The name surfaced from the depths of my memory, pulled from hushed office gossip and sensational newspaper headlines. Cassian Arcole, the enigmatic head of the Velasca Consortium, The whispers in the city's underbelly painted him as more of a king than a criminal, a man who operated by a strange, antiquated code. They called it the Eve's Rule. It was said he offered sanctuary to any woman, child, or defenseless person who came to him for shelter, that his protection was absolute so long as you stood under his roof. A mafia boss with a moral code. It was a paradox, a fairy tale for the desperate. And I was desperate. The conflict was a physical agony, tearing me in two. On one side, a lifetime of believing in rules, in the system, in the light. On the other, the cold, hard proof on this USB that the system was a lie, the light a facade. Could I trust a man like Cassian Arkell? The leader of a criminal empire, to hand him this data would be to trade one monster for another. But to be caught by Compact Shield meant the data would disappear. Mrs. Gable and hundreds like her would be forgotten, and I would be silenced, permanently. Through the tiny gap between the door and the floor, I saw a second pair of shoes join the first. Polished, expensive Oxfords, they stood still, waiting. The time for deliberation was over. The voice came again, even softer this time, laced with something that sounded like a painful memory. I'm here because my sister once ran into a room just like this, and no one came knocking for her. That was it. The sentence that broke through the wall of my fear. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise of power. It was a confession, a shared moment of humanity offered through a closed door. It was a reason. My hand moved on its own, my fingers finding the cold, metal latch. It slid back with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. With a deep, shuddering breath, I pulled the door open. Cassian Arkell was taller than I'd imagined, his frame filling the narrow space. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored coat that seemed to drink the light, making him a figure of shadow and substance. He smelled of crisp night air, of rain on cold pavement, and faintly, of mint. But it was his eyes that held me. They were gray, the color of a storm-tossed sea, and they held no curiosity, no judgment, no pity. They were calm, assessing, and in their depths, I saw a silent, unbreakable commitment. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his coat and produced a small, warmed towel, the kind they offer in first class. With a slow, deliberate movement, he took my trembling hand, the one not clutching the USB drive, and gently pressed the warm cloth to the back of it. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, it nearly broke me. His touch was firm, steadying. His gaze flickered from my face to the hallway beyond, already calculating, planning. "They're clearing the east wing," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "We'll use the service corridor." He moved with an unnerving grace, one hand resting lightly on the small of my back, guiding me out of the stall and toward an unmarked door I hadn't even noticed. He was a shield, his body positioned between me and the main entrance, a silent promise of protection. As we slipped into the dim, utilitarian hallway, he pressed something cold and metallic into my palm. I looked down. It was a sleek, heavy card, blank except for a subtle, embossed crest. "If we get separated," he said, his eyes never leaving the path ahead, "scan this. The emergency doors will recognize it." His fingers brushed mine as he released the card, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of warmth through my frozen limbs. We were moving quickly now, our footsteps echoing softly in the concrete passage. The distant sounds of the gala faded, replaced by the hum of machinery and the steady beat of my own heart, which for the first time in an hour felt less like the frantic drumming of a trapped bird and more like the powerful rhythm of a war drum. I didn't know if I had just made a deal with the devil, but as I followed the dark figure through the hidden veins of the halcyon crown, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer hiding. I was running toward a fight. The heavy steel door of the service stairs slammed shut behind us, the thud echoing in the concrete well. The air changed instantly, from the perfumed chill of the hotel's upper floors to the damp, industrial smell of bleach and old plumbing. Cassian didn't run. His pace was a measured, relentless glide that forced me to almost jog to keep up. My heels, designed for plush carpets, skidded dangerously on the gritty steps. He held my elbow, his grip a firm, impersonal anchor. "They'll be sealing the exits," I whispered, my voice sounding shrill in the narrow space. "Not these exits," he murmured, never breaking stride. We descended into the guts of the Halcyon Crown, a place of humming generators and snaking pipes I never knew existed. The smell of bleach was overwhelming, and it triggered a memory, pulling me back 3 weeks. It started in the records room at the Riverlight Center, not with a bang, but with a smudge, a stack of eviction notices for properties in the Ardem County District. I was just supposed to file them, to mark another dozen families as displaced, but I knew the county seal. I'd interned at the verification office. The real stamp had a flaw in the eagle's talon. These were perfect, too perfect, which meant they were fake. I spent my nights cross-referencing property codes with LLC filings, fueled by vending machine coffee and a cold, rising dread. The properties weren't being seized by banks. They were being acquired by a series of shell companies, empty corporate husks with optimistic names like Keystone Futures and Horizon Redevelopment. These companies would evict the tenants using the forged orders, then immediately sell the now empty buildings to a single, massive overseas trust. It was a ghost operation, clean, fast, and utterly invisible to the system. I brought my findings to my supervisor, Daniel, and he was a good man, or so I thought. He stared at the folder I'd prepared, his face going pale. He slid it back across the desk. "Nor, drop this," he said, his voice barely audible. "You're chasing shadows." "Daniel, these are fraudulent. They're using fake court orders. People are losing their homes." "You don't understand," he hissed, glancing at his open office door. "The Civil Integrity Bureau oversees our federal funding. They're the ones who monitor our compliance." He tapped the folder. "You start waving this around, you're not just risking your job, you're risking this entire center. They will shut us down." The CIB, the very agency meant to ensure integrity in city housing, was the boogeyman he was afraid of. The watchdog was compromised. His warning, however, evaporated 2 days later when Mrs. Petrova sat at my desk. She was 80, a refugee from a country that no longer existed, and her hands, gnarled with arthritis, twisted a damp handkerchief. "They came at 5 in the morning, miss," she whispered, her eyes clouded with confusion. 5 o'clock. Big men. They said I had to go. They said this," she tapped the fake notice, "was from the judge. They put my things on the sidewalk." She started to cry, a silent, terrible weeping. "My husband's chair. They just left it in the rain." I promised her I would help. It was a stupid, reckless promise, but I'd made it, and it was that promise that had put the USB drive in my purse. The memory dissolved as Cassian pulled me through a final steel door into the cavernous, humming silence of the P3 sub-basement. The air was cold, thick with the smell of concrete and high-end exhaust. Rows of dark, gleaming luxury cars sat under the sickly yellow fluorescent lights like sleeping beasts. A black sedan, impossibly clean, idled silently in a restricted zone near the freight elevator. Cassian opened the rear door. The plush leather interior looked like another, safer world. But I froze. The escape from the restroom had been pure instinct. Now, my brain was catching up. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaking. I can take it from here. I'll be fine." He didn't even look at me. He was scanning the garage, his head tilted, listening. "No, you won't. They're watching the exits. They're looking for a woman in a blue dress, running scared. You won't make it to the street." "So what?" I challenged, clutching the drive so hard my knuckles ached. "You're my personal chauffeur now. I don't even know you." "A switch," he said simply, as if explaining a very basic concept. He walked around and opened the driver's door. "They're looking for you. They aren't looking for me." He gestured to the back seat. "Get in. Lie on the floor." The floor. They won't see you. The glass is double-layered, reflective. They see a car. They see me. They don't see you. He slid into the driver's seat. Your call, Noor. But you have about 10 seconds before the stairwell door opens again. I scrambled in, my gown tearing with a small, sickening sound as it caught on the door latch. I huddled on the floor, my cheek pressed against the plush carpeting. It smelled like leather and his cologne that faint, clean scent of mint. The door shut with a heavy, sound-dampening thud, plunging me into near darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was insane. I was hiding at the feet of a Mafia boss. The memory of the gala, of how I was caught, flashed in my mind. It was Amy from accounting who had suggested I go. Noor, you're always stressed about our funding, she'd said, her smile bright and encouraging over lunch last week. The Halcyon Gala is where the real money is. Your department's biggest sponsors will be there. Go, mingle. It's good for the center. She'd gotten me the ticket. I'd hated the idea. But I went, thinking maybe I could talk to someone. Maybe I could find a donor who actually cared, who I could appeal to. I saw the guest list at the check-in table, and there it was, the lead sponsor of the entire event, the Avalon Reconstruction Fund. My blood ran cold. Avalon, the name from my late-night digging. It was the final destination, the international trust that all the shell companies funneled their stolen properties to, the philanthropic face of the entire criminal enterprise, Sable Meridian. Amy hadn't just sent me to mingle, she'd sent me straight into the serpent's den. I felt dizzy, the champagne turning to acid in my stomach. I saw them then. The men in sharp suits who weren't guests, the way their eyes scanned the room, they weren't security, they were watchers. That's when I saw the laptop at the silent auction table, unattended, logged into a private server. It was arrogant. They were so untouchable they didn't even bother with basic security. I didn't think, I just acted. I pulled the USB from my clutch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get it into the port. A small, red light on the drive started to blink. Downloading. I stood there, smiling at a passing waiter, pretending to look at a bid sheet for a trip to Tuscany. Hurry, hurry. A file transfer window popped up, complete. I pulled the drive. As my hand closed around it, a voice whispered directly behind my ear, low and amused. That's a very expensive souvenir. I turned, a man I didn't recognize. His face a pleasant mask, his eyes devoid of all warmth. You're being watched, little girl. Panic, pure and absolute, clawed up my throat. I didn't say a word. I just turned and ran. I pushed through a knot of guests, ignoring their offended gasps, and bolted for the service corridor I'd passed earlier. I heard a man's voice bark an order, and the heavy, unmistakable sound of a guard's footsteps pounding the marble behind me. That's when I saw the sign for the ladies' lounge, a gilded sanctuary. I'd thrown myself inside, locking myself in the stall, my world shrinking to that tiny, cold space. Until Cashin's knock. The car was moving, the acceleration smooth and powerful. I was pressed against the transmission tunnel, my body rigid. We ascended the ramp, and I heard the muffled sound of the attendant's voice. Cassian's reply was a low murmur. The barrier arm lifted. We were out. We drove for several blocks in silence. I counted the turns. Right, left again. Then a sudden, violent surge of speed pinned me to the floor. Cassian took a hard right, the tires screaming in protest. Stay down, he commanded. His voice was flat, all business. I heard it then, the high-pitched whine of another engine, too close, followed by the heavier roar of a second. We were being followed, a dark convoy. The sedan swerved again, a gut-wrenching maneuver that threw me against the passenger side door. I squeezed my eyes shut, my promise to Mrs. Petrova a fading prayer. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos, the deep, throaty growl of two heavy motorcycles. They appeared from nowhere, flanking us, their engines so loud I could feel the vibration through the chassis. They weren't chasing us. They were with us. I felt Cashin tap a quick, rhythmic pattern on the center console. A signal. At the intersection for the Marrow Bridge, our car suddenly slammed on its brakes, the tires shrieking. The cars behind us reacted a split second too late. At that exact instant, the two motorcycles split. One swerved directly into the path of the lead pursuit car. I heard a catastrophic, metallic crunch. The second motorcycle shot past us, broadsiding the other car, forcing it into the bridge piling. It was brutal, efficient, and over in 3 seconds. Our sedan shot forward, accelerating onto the bridge, leaving the tangled wreck and the angry shouts behind. We drove for another 10 minutes, the car slowing to a legal, unremarkable speed. Cassian was breathing steadily. His hands relaxed on the wheel, as if he'd just been out for a quiet evening drive. He finally pulled over on a dark, quiet street overlooking the river, the city lights a distant, glittering smear. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "You can get up," he said. I scrambled onto the seat, my hair wild, my gown ruined. I was shaking, not from fear, but from a volatile mix of adrenaline and fury. I looked at the man beside me, his profile barely visible in the dark. "Why?" I demanded, my voice raw. "Why did you do that? Who are you?" He turned, and even in the shadows, his gray eyes seemed to glitter. "I told you. You're safe with me." That's not an answer," I nearly shouted. Your men, they just... What do you want from me?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze seeming to strip away every layer of my carefully constructed composure. "Because the person you trusted," he said, his voice quiet and cold, "the one who sent you to that gala, sold you out." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And because I need our mutual enemy to show their hand." He looked out at the dark water. "Sable Meridian has been a problem for a long time. They're reckless. They hurt the wrong people." He turned his gaze back to me, and it was so intense it felt like a physical weight. "Tonight, you made them panic. And when they panic, they get loud. I needed them to get loud." We didn't stay by the river. The moments of quiet revelation were a luxury we couldn't afford. "They'll be looking for this car now," Cassian said, his voice flat as he started the engine. "Amy wasn't the only one who saw you leave. She just provided the context." We switched cars twice. The first was a quick, anonymous transfer in a multi-level parking garage, leaving the gleaming sedan for a bland family minivan. The second was in the echoing emptiness of an all-night automated car wash, stepping from the minivan into a heavy-duty, windowless utility van. With each change, I felt another layer of my old life sloughing off, leaving me rawer, more exposed. Cassian drove with an unnerving calm, his movements economical, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors with a practiced rhythm. We moved away from the glittering center of Graybridge, toward the industrial waterfront, a place of dormant cranes and the skeletal remains of forgotten industry. The air grew thick with the smell of salt, low tide, and rust. He pulled the van into a cavernous, dark warehouse at the end of Pier Verona. It looked abandoned, the corrugated metal sighing in the river breeze. He led me through a maze of shipping containers stacked like monoliths in the gloom. He didn't use a key. He pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner hidden on a junction box, and a section of a container wall hissed open, revealing a heavy steel door. We descended a flight of narrow concrete steps, and the world above disappeared. We emerged into a long, brightly lit bunker. The opulence of the Halcyon Crown felt like a distant, hazy dream. This place was its antithesis pure, cold function. Harsh neon strips on the low ceiling illuminated a space that was part military command center, part high-tech laboratory. The air was chilled, recycled, and smelled of ozone and cooling steel. One entire wall was covered in maps, city grids, utility lines, structural blueprints of half the buildings in Graybridge. 3 people were waiting, clustered around a massive steel table covered in monitors and wiring. They didn't look like the Mafia thugs of my imagination. They looked like a burned-out, high-stress tech team pulling an all-nighter. "This is Noor Avalos," Cashin said by way of introduction. He didn't say, "I rescued her," or "she's in trouble," just my name, a statement of fact. He gestured to the woman at the table. "This is Yara Mendez. She runs our strategy." Yara looked up, her dark hair pulled back in a bun so severe it seemed to pull at the corners of her sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore a crisp button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She gave me a single, comprehensive nod, her gaze taking in my ruined gown, my bare feet I'd long since abandoned the heels, and the USB drive I still held in a death grip. "Oleg Rybak," Cassian continued, indicating a broad-shouldered man who sat slightly apart, his posture one of absolute stillness. He looked like a man who could blend into a brick wall or break it down with equal ease. "Counter-surveillance." Oleg inclined his head, a gesture of minimal, polite acknowledgement. "And priest." The last man was thin and pale, vibrating with a restless energy. He wore a simple black hoodie, the hood pulled up, and his face was illuminated by the glow of 3 screens. His fingers were a blur across a customized keyboard, a frantic, silent dance. "The nickname is ironic," Cassian added, his voice dry. He was a seminarian. Priest didn't look up, his voice emerging, raspy, from the depths of his hood. "Ex-seminarian, big difference. God has better firewalls. The chair is clean." Yara pushed a steel chair away from the table with her foot. "Sit." Cassian moved to the head of the table, and the transformation was immediate. The man who had spoken of his sister, who had offered me a warm towel, was gone. In his place stood the head of the Velasca Consortium. His calm was no longer reassuring. It was absolute, a gravity well that pulled the entire room into his orbit. "We have very little time," he said, his voice resonating in the concrete room. "Compact Shield knows who you are. Amy made sure of that. They know what you took. What they don't know, for now, is where you are. That advantage will last an hour, maybe 2. He fixed his gray eyes on me. "So, the truth. Right now, everything you know." I looked at the 3 faces watching me. Yara, impatient, Oleg, watchful, Priest, seemingly indifferent, but I knew he was listening, Cassian, immovable. My voice, when I spoke, was steadier than I expected. I was no longer an intake clerk. I was a witness. I laid it all out. The file room discovery, the forged seals from the Ardem County Verification Office, the complex web of shell companies, the rapid buy and sells, all funneling into the same single entity, the Avalon Reconstruction Fund. "They're clearing the entire Flint River corridor," I finished, the USB drive feeling warm in my hand. "It's a systematic depopulation, dressed up as legal evictions. Compact Shield provides the muscle, but they're using falsified court orders, backed by a few complicit officers from the Civil Integrity Bureau to make it look legitimate. They give families 10 minutes. I have it all on this drive." Priest spun one of his monitors around and pushed a shielded, air-gapped terminal toward me. "Plug it in." I inserted the drive. Priest's fingers flew, his other 2 screens filling with scrolling lines of code. The room was silent for a full minute. The only sound, the aggressive clack, clack, clack of his keys. Suddenly, he stopped. "Holy!" He looked up, his eyes wide, finding Cassian. "She's right. This isn't just good. This is surgical. The digital signatures on these eviction notices. They're not just forgeries. They're perfect clones. They were stolen, lifted directly from the CIB's primary server." He pushed his hood back, revealing a pale, sweating forehead. "This isn't just fraud, Cassian. This is a state-level security breach. Someone didn't just give Sable Meridian a key. They handed over the entire damn lock." Cassian turned to the large glass partition that separated the main room from a silent server bank. He picked up a black dry erase marker. He wrote Sable Meridian at the top. An arrow pointed down to Avalon Trust Finance. 2 arrows split from there, one to Compact Shield Muscle, one to CIB Insider Access. He drew a wide circle around the entire diagram. Then, from that circle, he drew one heavy arrow pointing to a blank space. He tapped the glass. "What goes here?" Nor. I don't know, I said. The trail ends at Avalon. It's an overseas trust. No, it doesn't, Cashin said. He wrote 2 names, Councilman Davies, Assemblyman Rourke. The Flint River Corridor. It's the proposed site for the new city stadium and casino complex. Davies and Rourke are the ones pushing the zoning changes. He turned to face me. They're not just stealing homes. They're engineering a massive forced buyout of an entire district, laundering the land through Avalon, and using their puppets in the city government to rezone it for a $1 billion windfall. A cold, hard silence settled on the room. This was so much bigger than I had ever imagined. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Cassian's gaze was piercing. "That's the wrong question. What do you want?" "Nor justice. Revenge for your friend Amy's betrayal." "I want them to stop," I said, the image of Mrs. Petrova's face, confused and terrified, burning in my mind. "I want the families to be safe. I want them to pay for what they did." "Good," he said. "Revenge is a fire. Justice is a tool. We'll be using tools." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the steel table. "Here is the offer. I will give you the full protection of the Velasca Consortium, my resources, my people. You will become a ghost. In exchange, you give us that data, and you give us your expertise. You walk us through every file. You help us build a case our way." He held up a hand as I started to speak. "Our way means no one else gets hurt, no civilians, no collateral damage. We expose them, we dismantle them, but we do it precisely. We don't burn down the city to catch one rat." "That's slow," Yara interjected, her voice sharp. "It's inefficient. We have the data now. We have the CIB breach. We can leak this to every news outlet in the state. We can start the fire and watch them all burn by sunrise." "No." Cashin's voice was like a whip crack, cutting her off. "You do that, Yara, and you start a fire you can't control. The second this data goes public, Sable Meridian activates their political assets. They'll shred every piece of paper, wipe every server, burn the original ledgers. They'll sacrifice a few CIB grunts and compact shield. The people at the top, the ones who own Avalon, the ones who pull Rourke's strings will walk away clean. The data becomes useless noise. And the families," he looked back at me, "they become a liability. They'll be silenced, discredited, or worse, to clean up the loose ends." He was right. A data dump would just be a bomb. What he was proposing was a scalpel. I had leverage, for the first time in my life. Standing in a concrete bunker in a ruined dress, I had real power. "I have a condition," I said, my voice clear. Cassian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something respect amusement in his eyes. "Go on." "The families, the ones on that list, Mrs. Petrova, the Gables, the Ortegas. There are over 200 people. They're not safe. Sable Meridian knows I took the list. They'll assume I've talked to them. They'll go back to clean up their tracks. You said no civilians caught in the crossfire." "What do you propose?" he asked. "St. Lamb's House," I said. "It's a community network of shelters, churches and safe houses. They're off the grid, run by volunteers. They can hide people, but they can't handle an influx of this size overnight. They need transport, secure food, resources." Oleg looked mildly impressed. Yara looked annoyed by the complication. Cassian simply nodded, as if I'd asked for a glass of water. "Oleg, arrange the transport. I want 3 unmarked buses and 6 vans. Use the church auxiliary routes. Yara, transfer $500,000 to the St. Lamb's General Fund, anonymous donation. Earmark it for a food pantry expansion." $500,000 for a food pantry, just like that. I stared at him. I had come here expecting a monster, a man who dealt in violence and shadows, and here he was, in a sterile concrete room, ordering the protection and feeding of 200 displaced people without blinking an eye. I saw the devil put his money exactly where it was needed most, and a tiny, dangerous spark of trust ignited in the cold pit of my stomach. The operational tension in the room broke. Yara and Oleg moved to their stations. murmuring in low tones about encrypted routes and logistics. Priest put on a pair of heavy headphones, his face illuminated by cascading lines of code, and was lost to the world. I was left standing in the middle of the room, suddenly, acutely aware of my torn dress, the filth on my legs, and the bone-deep tremor that hadn't stopped since I'd fled the gala. Cassian watched me for a long moment. The hard edges of the boss softened, and the man from the car returned. "You're in shock," he stated, not unkindly. He walked to a small alcove that held an industrial coffee maker and a microwave. He didn't ask what I wanted. He pulled a heavy ceramic mug from a cabinet and a tin of cocoa powder. I heard the scrape of a spoon, the splash of bottled water. He microwaved it. He brought the mug back to me. Hot cocoa. The smell was sweet, childish, and so utterly out of place in this steel and neon bunker that it almost made me cry. "Drink," he said. I reached for it, but my hands were shaking so violently I couldn't trust my grip. I was afraid I would drop it, spilling this small, absurd kindness all over the concrete floor. He didn't pull away. He didn't sigh in exasperation. He simply held the mug steady, his own large, calloused hands enveloping the ceramic, waiting for me to find my hold. His fingers were warm, his touch firm, grounding. I finally managed to wrap my own trembling fingers around the mug, stealing the warmth from his. Our eyes met over the rim. His gaze was unwavering, that same deep, gray ocean. But this time, it wasn't assessing me or calculating odds. It was just present. He was seeing me. Nor Avalos, not the asset, not the victim. Me. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly seeing him. I took a sip. The heat was a shock, scalding my throat, but it was a good pain. It was real. It was an anchor. A soft chime, barely audible, echoed through the bunker. It wasn't a panicked alarm, just a polite notification. Priest didn't look up, but Oleg swiveled in his chair, his eyes on a small, dark monitor I hadn't noticed. It showed a grainy, night vision feed of the pier above. A dark van, no markings, was rolling slowly past the warehouse entrance. My heart leaped into my throat. "They found us!" Oleg chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He smiled, a thin, wolfish grin that didn't reach his eyes. He tapped the screen, where the van was now stopping. "No," he said. "That's just the welcoming committee." He glanced at a digital clock in the corner of his screen. "They're right on schedule." Cassian hadn't moved. He was still watching me. "Drink your cocoa. Nor. The night is just getting started." Oleg's smile was the last calm thing I saw. The world shattered a second later, not with an explosion, but with a series of heavy, synchronized thuds from above the sound of rappel lines hitting the warehouse roof. A high-pitched squeal cut through the bunker, and the neon lights flickered and died, plunging us into a disorienting twilight, lit only by the frantic glow of the monitors. "Phase 1, Yara snapped, her voice cutting through the sudden gloom. "They're on the roof, breaching in 60 seconds. Priest was already a phantom, his face illuminated by a single, blood-red screen. "Cutting external cams, they're blind." Chaos erupted, but it was a controlled, rehearsed chaos. Oleg slammed a heavy, red button on the wall, and I heard a deep, mechanical groan from above. Before I could process what was happening, Cassian was beside me, his presence a sudden, solid wall in the flickering darkness. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size. "This is going to be loud," he said, his voice a low, calm murmur directly in my ear that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. And confusing, that's the point. He gently turned my head and pressed something impossibly small and cold into my ear canal. It was no bigger than a grain of rice. A tiny, almost inaudible hum started, and then his voice was inside my head, clear and intimate, as if he were whispering directly into my thoughts. "Listen to my voice. Nor, only my voice. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Good. When I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back. You don't stop. From above, the sound of industrial saws whining to life vibrated through the concrete. They were cutting through the roof. "Mist system active," Yara announced. A series of loud hisses echoed through the bunker, and a thick, white fog began to pour from vents in the ceiling. It wasn't smoke, it was cool and odorless, but it instantly reduced visibility to less than a foot. The world dissolved into a swirling, white void. My rising panic felt like a physical weight, threatening to crush me. "Now, Nor, go!" Suddenly, the backup lights kicked in. Not the steady neons, but a series of brutally bright, strobing flashes that pulsed in a disorienting rhythm, turning the mist into a nightmare of flashing white and deep, impenetrable shadow. It was an assault on the senses. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling a wave of vertigo. "Open your eyes," Cassian's voice commanded, a firm anchor in the sensory storm. "Look at the floor." I forced my eyes open, and I saw them. Faintly glowing on the concrete floor, visible for a split second between each blinding flash of the strobes, were phosphorescent arrows. They formed a path, a secret language written in light, leading away from the command center and into the darkness, the Eve's code, a path made just for me. "Follow them, move." I ran. My bare feet were silent on the cold concrete. I stumbled through the mist, my entire world reduced to the strobing flashes and the glowing green arrows on the floor. I couldn't see anything else. I didn't know where the others were. I just had the arrows and the voice in my head. A deafening crash came from behind me as the compact shield team breached. Dropping into the main room, I heard shouts, muffled by the mist. A moment later, a different, acrid smell hit the air. Tear gas. "Veer left," Cassian's voice said, calm and steady. "The arrows will guide you around the gas dispersal. Keep your head down." I obeyed without thinking, my body responding to his commands as if I were a puppet on a string. I ducked low, my hand trailing along a cool metal wall for guidance. The path of glowing arrows curved sharply, leading me away from the worst of the chemical haze. Through a brief thinning of the mist, I caught a glimpse of Oleg. He was standing beside a massive electrical panel, unfurling a huge, shimmering sheet of what looked like heavy-duty aluminum foil. He clipped it to the ceiling grid, and it dropped to the floor, creating a curtain, a temporary wall that would be invisible to thermal imaging, a blind spot. He gave a grim, satisfied nod into the mist and then vanished. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. I started to cough, my eyes watering. "Don't panic, it's almost over," Cassian's voice soothed. "Listen." And then I heard it, a new sound, a loud clunk followed by the rush of water. From above, the fire sprinkler system roared to life, but it wasn't a fine spray. It was a deluge, hacked by Yara. It was dumping torrents of cold, clean water into the bunker, washing the tear gas from the air and turning the concrete floor into a shallow, fast-moving river. The sound of the artificial downpour was immense, a cleansing roar that overwhelmed the shouts and the clatter of gear. It washed over me, and some of the frantic terror in my chest washed away with it. The sound of rain. It was a sound I understood. It was calming. I reached the bottom of the steel staircase that led up to the warehouse floor. For a split second, I hesitated. My hand on the railing, I wanted to look back. "Don't." Cassian's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "I'm right behind you. Go!" I didn't see him, but as I started to climb, I caught a final, strobing glimpse of the command center through the curtain of water and mist. I saw a dark shape, Cassian, moving not away from the breach, but toward it. I saw him intercept the first two compact shield operators who stumbled through the downpour. His movements were a blur of precise, brutal efficiency. There was no wasted motion. He didn't strike. He redirected. He used their own momentum against them. I saw the glint of a weapon and then a fluid, twisting motion from Cassian. The rifle was wrenched from the man's grasp, dismantled in his hands, the pieces clattering uselessly to the wet floor. He didn't neutralize the man, he neutralized the threat. It was over in a heartbeat. Then the mist and the strobing lights swallowed the scene. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs and into the cavernous, dark warehouse above. The air was cool and smelled of salt. I was in the maze of shipping containers. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I ran, my feet slapping against the dusty concrete, my mind a blank slate of pure survival instinct. I didn't know where I was going. A hand, warm and strong, landed firmly between my shoulder blades. I gasped and spun around, ready to fight, to scream. It was Cassian. He wasn't even out of breath. His dark coat was soaked, dripping onto the floor, but he seemed completely unaffected by the chaos we had just escaped. His hand on my back was a steadying weight, a solid wall I could lean against. "This way," he murmured, his real voice sounding strange after having it inside my head. He started to guide me through the labyrinth of containers when a brilliant, blinding beam of light sliced through the darkness, pinning us. "Freeze compact shield." My blood turned to ice. A guard, one who must have been posted outside, was standing at the end of the aisle, his flashlight beam fixed on us, his other hand raising a weapon. Without thinking, I reacted. I grabbed the front of Cassian's wet coat and pulled him down with all my weight. We stumbled and fell together behind the corner of a massive, rust-streaked container. The flashlight beam sliced through the air where we had just been standing. We were crouched in the darkness, pressed together. My back was against the cold steel of the container, and Cassian was a shield in front of me. The space was so tight my cheek was pressed against the damp fabric of his shoulder. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the rain and the mint and something else, something uniquely him. His breath was warm against my temple. The frantic beat I heard wasn't just my own heart, it was his, a deep, steady rhythm against my ear. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, the world shrank to that tiny, dark space, to the sound of our mingled breathing and the drumming of his heart. The guard was advancing, his footsteps slow and cautious. "Good work," Cassian whispered, his voice a low vibration that I felt more than heard. The unexpected praise sent a flush of heat across my face that had nothing to do with fear. He put a finger to his lips, then pointed. At the far end of the warehouse, a set of interior lights flickered on, illuminating a different aisle. A diversion. Olek or Yara. The guard's head turned toward the light, his attention momentarily diverted. "Now," Cassian breathed. We moved as one, sprinting away in the opposite direction, our footsteps masked by the distant clatter of a deliberately knocked-over pile of pallets. We rounded another corner and saw at the open side door the windowless utility van we'd arrived in, its engine already rumbling. Olek was in the driver's seat. We scrambled in, and Cassian slammed the heavy door shut behind us. Olek didn't wait. The van lurched forward, tires squealing as we peeled out of the warehouse and into the pre-dawn gloom of the waterfront. Looking back through the windshield, I saw the lights of the warehouse flicker and die. It went dark, silent, a ghost building. "Empty mode," Olek grunted. "They'll find nothing but a wet floor, some broken zip ties, and a few bait-and-switch servers that will wipe themselves the second they're accessed." I collapsed onto the cold metal floor of the cargo bay. The adrenaline that had been holding me together for the past 2 hours vanished, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion so profound I felt like I might dissolve into a puddle on the floor. A shudder racked my body, a delayed reaction to the cold and the terror. I didn't realize Cassian had sat down beside me until a dry towel was draped over my shoulders. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fill the silence. He just sat there, his back against the vibrating wall of the van, his presence a quiet, solid fact. He was close enough that our shoulders were almost touching, and I felt a strange sense of comfort in the shared silence, a feeling of not being alone in the aftermath. My head felt too heavy to hold up. Without conscious thought, I let it fall sideways, my temple coming to rest against the damp, solid muscle of his shoulder. I expected him to tense up, to pull away. He didn't. He remained perfectly still, a silent acceptance of the contact. I closed my eyes. Just for a second, Martin. After a moment, I felt a gentle pressure on my knee. I opened my eyes. His hand was resting there, his fingers long and warm. It wasn't a possessive gesture, not a claim. It was light, a quiet question. "Are you okay? Is this okay?" A silent offer of comfort? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I just left his hand where it was. And in that small, silent gesture, something shifted between us. A fragile truce was declared. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the van winding through the back streets of the sleeping city. I must have drifted off, because I was startled awake when the van finally rolled to a stop. The back door opened, letting in the cool, fragrant air of the early morning. We were in a quiet, manicured alley behind a row of charming brick townhouses. A sign, delicately lettered, hung above one of the back doors, the Night Orchard Tea House. Yara was waiting. "Secured," she said, her face grim but relieved. I stumbled out of the van, the towel still wrapped around my shoulders. Inside, the tea house was a haven of polished wood, the air thick with the scent of chamomile and lavender. They led me to a small, comfortable-looking sofa in a quiet corner. I sank into the cushions, my body screaming with fatigue. The others were talking in low, urgent tones, already planning the next move. Their voices were a distant buzz. My eyelids felt like lead weights. I was vaguely aware of a weight settling over me, heavier than the towel. I forced my eyes open a crack. Cassian was standing over me, draping his own heavy, dry coat over my shoulders. He looked at Yara and Oleg. "Let her sleep," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Keep it down." As my eyes drifted shut, the last thing I felt was the lingering warmth of his coat, the faint scent of mint and rain, and for the first time since I'd walked into the Halcyon Crown, the overwhelming, impossible sensation of being safe. I woke to the scent of jasmine and the unfamiliar sensation of soft linen against my cheek. For a disoriented moment, I thought I was back in my own bed, tangled in a strange dream of dark sedans and flashing lights. But my apartment didn't have sunlight that slanted in dusty gold bars from a high, angled window, and it certainly didn't feel this quiet, this still. I sat up. I was in a cozy attic room, tucked under the eaves of the tea house. Someone had taken Cassian's heavy coat and replaced it with a thick, soft quilt. My ruined gown was gone, and in its place, neatly folded on a wooden chair, were a pair of soft gray sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt. On the small table beside the bed sat a plate with a thick slice of toasted brioche, a small pot of glistening marmalade, and a single folded piece of paper. My first instinct, a muscle memory from the last 24 hours, was suspicion, but the exhaustion in my bones was a heavier weight than my fear. I unfolded the note. The handwriting was strong and spare, all clean, sharp angles. "Eat first, argue later." A small, involuntary smile touched my lips. I was starving. The toast was still warm, and the marmalade was sharp and sweet. As I ate, the simple domestic act felt like a reclamation, a small piece of normalcy in a world that had been turned completely upside down. When I was dressed, I found my way down a narrow set of stairs and into the main tea house. It was empty, the morning light filtering through the front windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Cassian was standing by a back door, staring out into the alley, a mug cradled in his hands. He heard my footsteps and turned, in the soft light, stripped of his tactical overcoat and the shadows of the night. He looked younger, less like a consortium head and more like a man carrying an invisible weight. He didn't say anything, just tilted his head toward a steep, metal staircase on the outside of the building. "Come on." The stairs led to a hidden world, a rooftop garden, a vibrant green oasis perched 4 stories above the city streets, surrounded by the muted red brick of the neighboring buildings. Planter boxes overflowed with herbs the sharp, clean scent of mint and the earthy, pine-like fragrance of rosemary filled the air. It was a secret, living place, a sanctuary of calm. He led me to a simple wooden bench overlooking the city. My sister, Lena, would have liked this place, he said, his voice quiet, his gaze distant. I waited, knowing this wasn't a casual remark. The men who came for her family weren't from Compact Shield, he continued, his eyes fixed on the horizon. They were from the city, official. They had a piece of paper that said urban renewal, which was just a polite term for eminent domain for the benefit of a wealthy developer. Her husband tried to fight it. He had the deed, the tax records, everything. But their paperwork was better. Their lawyers were better. He took a slow, deep breath. She ran, panicked. She hid in the restroom of a bus station downtown. She called me, crying, saying they were going to take her kids. I was 19, stupid, and all I had was a stolen car and a temper. By the time I got there, they were gone. The city had put her and the kids in a temporary shelter on the other side of the state. It took me 3 days to find them, 3 days where she was alone, thinking no one was coming for her. He finally looked at me, and in his gray eyes, I saw the ghost of that 19-year-old boy, the Eve's rule. It's not some grand moral code, nor. It's a promise that no one under my roof will ever feel the way she did in that bus station. It started with a mistake. It started with being too late. The story settled in my heart, a heavy, sad weight. It wasn't about power or control. It was about a closed door he never got to knock on. It was about filling a silence that had haunted him for years. My gaze fell to his wrist, where the edge of his sleeve had ridden up. A thin, white scar, straight as a ruler's edge, bisected the blue veins there. It was old, but stark against his skin. Acting on an impulse I didn't fully understand, I reached out, my fingers light, and traced the raised line of skin. It was a story written in his flesh, a piece of the man he was before he became Cassian Arcole. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just stood there, perfectly still, allowing the contact, allowing me to read the silent history. A mistake at 19, he said, his voice a low rumble. Lesson learned. He let my hand fall away, then turned to face me. You're still shaking. It was true. A fine, persistent tremor still hummed just beneath my skin, a physical echo of the fear. I know something that might help, he said. It's a breathing technique. Lena's therapist taught it to her. He moved to stand behind me, his closeness making the air feel thick. I'm going to put my hands on your ribs, just to guide your breathing. Is that okay? I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. His hands, large and warm, came to rest on my sides, his thumbs meeting in the center of my back, his long fingers wrapping around my ribcage. The touch was firm, clinical, yet it sent a jolt of heat straight through me. I was acutely aware of the solid wall of his chest at my back, of his sheer physical presence. All right, he murmured, his voice close to my ear. Breathe in through your nose. I want you to feel your lungs expand, to push against my hands. 4 seconds. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. I inhaled, the scent of mint and clean cotton filling my lungs. I felt my ribs rise, pressing into the solid frame of his hands. Good. Now hold it. For 7 seconds. Just hold. The world seemed to pause in that held breath. Now, out through your mouth, slowly, 8 seconds. Let it all go. I exhaled, a long, slow sigh, and as the air left my lungs, some of the tension, the tightly coiled fear in my gut, went with it. We did it again, and again, with each cycle. His voice was the only thing I heard. The rise and fall of my own chest, the only thing I felt. The trembling in my hands began to subside. The frantic noise in my head quieted. My panic was dissolving, being replaced by a profound, startling awareness of the man standing behind me, of the steady rhythm of his own deep, even breaths that I could feel through his chest. When he finally dropped his hands, the absence of his touch was a sudden cold shock. I turned to face him. The morning sun was warm on my skin, catching in his dark hair. The rooftop was an island of impossible peace. A tide of something powerful and unspoken washed over me: gratitude, connection, a raw and terrifying intimacy. I looked up at him, and the analytical, calculating mask was gone from his eyes. They were soft, questioning. He didn't need to speak. The question was there in the slight tilt of his head, in the way his gaze dropped to my lips. It was a silent, respectful inquiry. "May I?" My answer was a barely perceptible nod, a single, small movement that felt like the biggest decision of my life. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. He didn't. The first touch of his lips was impossibly gentle. It was warm, hesitant, a question in itself. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of discovery. It tasted of mint and coffee and a quiet relief. He paused, pulling back just enough for a small, breathless laugh to escape me as our noses bumped. A genuine, unburdened sound. He smiled against my lips, a real smile, and kissed me again. This time, it was deeper, more certain. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. My own hands found their way to his waist, gripping the fabric of his shirt as if to anchor myself. His other hand found mine, and his fingers interlaced with my own, a silent, binding promise that closed a circuit between us. We stood there, wrapped in each other, the city a distant, forgotten hum below. It was longer than a first kiss should be. I leaned my head against his chest, the rough cotton of his shirt against my cheek, and listened as his heartbeat, which had been steady, picked up its pace to match my own, a frantic, shared rhythm. He tilted my chin up, and the kiss deepened again, a slow burn of awakening desire that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Just as the heat began to build, to spiral into something more, he stopped. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the cool morning air. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice rough. The simple, considerate question was more intimate than the kiss itself. In his world, a world of force and consequence, he was still asking for my consent, ensuring my comfort. "Okay," I breathed, a genuine smile spreading across my face. He didn't push for more. He held the moment, letting the intense fire bank into a warm, comforting glow. His hand slid from my face to my back, holding me close. We were two strangers, bound by violence and secrets, finding a fragile peace on a hidden rooftop. His coat, which I'd left on the chair, slipped from my shoulders, and I shivered as a cool breeze swept across the garden. Without a word, he pulled the quilt from a nearby storage bench and wrapped it around me, tucking me into his side. We both laughed, a quiet, shaky sound born of nerves and relief and hearts beating far too fast. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt two conflicting things at once: the primal, desperate desire to be safe and the new, burgeoning desire to be close to him. And in that moment, I realized they weren't in conflict at all. With him, they could coexist. The shrill electronic buzz of a phone shattered the perfect stillness. It wasn't mine. Cassian sighed, a sound of deep frustration, and pulled his phone from his pocket. He glanced at the screen. "Yara," he answered, his voice instantly losing its warmth, becoming clipped and professional again. "What is it?" He listened, his body going rigid beside me. The softness in his eyes hardened back into stone. He ended the call and looked at me, his expression grim. "That was Yara," he said, "the quiet haven of our morning evaporating like mist. There's an internal leak. Our lines are compromised." The warmth of the rooftop vanished as if a switch had been thrown. The quilt felt heavy, the scent of jasmine suddenly cloying. We descended the metal stairs in silence, the fragile peace of the morning shattered, replaced by the cold, hard reality that had been waiting for us. Back in the tea house, the atmosphere was pressurized. Yara and Oleg were standing by the main counter, the air around them brittle with suspicion. Priest's face was on a laptop screen, his video feed grainy and sharp. "The bunker wasn't a guess," Yara said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She didn't look at me. She looked at Cassian. "They didn't just follow Noor. They knew our protocols. The trace on the compromised line." Priest's tinny voice crackled from the speakers. "It didn't originate from Compact Shield. It's passive, an audio siphon. It's coming from inside the Urban Expansion office." I felt a cold lurch. "The UEO, but I filed a petition with them weeks ago, an official one about the evictions. And in doing so, you flagged yourself on their internal system," Cassian said, his eyes darkening. He was already connecting the dots. "The UEO's largest private grant for community outreach comes from one man, Dante Crowley." The name landed in the room like a stone. Dante Crowley. He was untouchable. A political kingmaker who hid behind a veneer of philanthropy, his face plastered on every museum wing and university library in Greybridge. "Crowley wants the Flint River corridor," Cassian continued, his voice a low growl. "He's been trying to get a casino charter passed for 2 years. The city council won't approve it while the area is residential. So he's clearing it," I whispered, the scope of it making me sick. "He's using Sable Meridian and the Avalon Trust to launder the land and the CIB to provide the legal cover. He'll buy it back from his own shell company as barren industrial land and build his casino. And now he knows we have the USB." Yara said, "He knows we have the entire chain of command, from the street-level evictions to his political office." "Good," I said, the words sounding harsh in the quiet room. "Then we burn him." "We leak it all," Yara agreed instantly, grabbing a tablet. "I can have this on every reporter's desk in an hour. He's a public figure. The media will tear him apart." "No," Cassian and I said at the exact same time. We looked at each other. The old Noor, the intake clerk, would have agreed with Yara. But the woman who had hidden in a stall and crouched behind a shipping container knew better. "A data dump is a bomb, not a scalpel," I said, finding my voice. It was my turn to lead. This was my world policy, bureaucracy, leverage. Crowley is a politician. He'll sacrifice his subordinates. He'll claim he was misled by the CIB, fire a few Compact Shield grunts on a technicality, and the Avalon Trust will dissolve overnight. The press gets a scandal, but the families get nothing. The evictions won't be reversed. They'll be buried in the noise. Cassian watched me, a flicker of approval in his gray eyes. "What do you propose?" "Noor." "A 2-tier justice plan," I said, pacing the floor. "The idea is coming fast. We create 2 packages. The clean file, just the forged eviction notices and the CIB signature breach, nothing linking it to Crowley or Avalon. We submit that officially to the Urban Equality Commission. They're not fast, but they're not corrupt. It will trigger a slow, legal, undeniable investigation that will freeze all current evictions in the corridor." "That's leverage," Cassian nodded. "This is the nail file," I continued. "The real data, the USB, the link from the evictions to Sable Meridian, to Avalon, and all the way up to Crowley's casino bid. We don't leak this. We keep it. We use it to negotiate. We don't just get the evictions paused, we get the families' homes restored." "Justice and leverage," Cassian said, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips. "I like it." "There's a problem," Oleg said, his voice quiet, drawing all our attention. He had been standing by his own monitors, his work silent. "Your plan is good, but it assumes the leak is only external. The UEO compromise explains how they tracked Noor. It doesn't explain how they knew the location of the bunker. It doesn't explain how they knew our tactical response. They were waiting for the mist." A heavy, toxic silence fell. He was right. The UEO leak was a problem. This was a betrayal. The implication was sickening. The traitor wasn't an ocean away. They were in this room. Yara, Oleg, Priest. My gaze flickered between them. Yara, brilliant and impatient. Oleg, watchful and silent. Priest, a disembodied voice in a box. Cassian. Oleg said, his voice tight. "I've been running secondary traces since the bunker raid. I found another signal. A high-frequency receiver. It's active. And it's in this building." My blood ran cold. Yara instinctively checked her pockets. Oleg held up a small directional finder. It beeped, the sound growing faster as he approached Yara's jacket, which was slung over a chair. "That's impossible," Yara whispered, her face draining of color. She pulled out her burner phone, the one Oleg had given her. Oleg took it from her hand. He didn't even have to open it. He just looked at the serial number etched on the back. "This isn't your phone. Yara, it's a clone. The serials are off by 1 digit. It's a perfect physical swap. When—" Yara's eyes widened, her mind flying back. "The bunker— when I went to trigger the sprinklers. I left my pack by the main console. It was maybe a minute." A minute was all it took. She hadn't betrayed them. She'd been compromised. But before any of us could feel relief, the laptop screen with Priest's face on it flickered, dissolved into static, and went black. Connection _terminated. Priest Cassian's voice was dangerously low. He tapped the laptop as if he could will the connection back. "Priest, report." Nothing but silence. "Oleg," Cassian snapped. "Backdoor cams, now." Oleg's fingers flew. A new screen lit up, showing the alleyway behind the tea house. It was empty. But as Oleg cycled through the filters, something came into focus, scrawled on the brick wall in white chalk. Just out of sight of the main door was a hastily drawn symbol and a few words. A small, simple cross, and beneath it, "Don't trust the holy name." "My God," Yara whispered. "Priest, the ex-seminarian. He's the traitor. He cut his line and ran." "No," I said, shaking my head, my mind racing. "No, that's not right. The chalk. It's a warning. He's accusing someone, not himself." "He's the only one with a holy name in our group," Oleg countered, his face grim. "It's a misdirection," I insisted, a strange certainty settling over me. "He's telling us not to trust someone else, someone holy." I looked at Cassian. "We were planning the clean file drop. Where was the proposed meeting spot, the one we discussed before the line cut?" "St. Eon's Chapel," Cassian said, his eyes narrowing as he caught my meaning. "With Father Michael." "Priest wasn't the traitor," I said. "He was compromised, and he was trying to warn us. Don't trust the holy name. He meant the priest at the chapel." "This changes the board," Cassian said, his focus absolute. "We have to assume they have Priest, which means they have his access." "We can't use the clean file plan," Yara said, her voice tight with fury at being duped. "They'll be waiting at the chapel." "No," Cassian said. "We use it. We set the trap. We know they're listening, both through Yara's phone and whatever access they tortured out of Priest. So we feed them what they want to hear." He turned to Oleg. "Create a fake data package, a honeypot. Encrypt it. Make it look like the real thing." He looked at me. "You and I will have a very loud, very clear argument about the drop-off. We'll stick to the chapel plan. We'll let them think they're intercepting the nail file." "And while they're at the chapel," Oleg said, a grim smile on his face, "I'll be watching the package. We'll see who comes to collect." That night, the tea house was a tomb of silent tension. I sat next to Cassian, our shoulders brushing, watching a grainy, infrared feed from Oleg's drone. It was parked, spider-like, on a rooftop overlooking the alley behind St. Eon's. "They're moving," Oleg murmured. A black van, the same type Compact Shield had used at the pier, rolled into the alley. The door slid open. 2 guards stepped out, and then a man in a priest's collar. Father Michael. He looked exactly as he had in the photos, a bland, smiling man. He was directing the guards, pointing to the designated dead drop spot, a locked donation box. But Oleg wasn't watching him. "Thermal is hot," he said, switching feeds. "There's someone else in the van. They're forcing him out." A thin, hooded figure was pushed out of the van. His hands were bound. It was Priest. He was alive. My heart ached. He'd been caught, and he had still found a way to warn us. The warning wasn't about him. It was from him. Father Michael was the mole inside the community network, feeding information to Crowley. "They took the bait," Cassian said, his voice like ice. Just then, Yara, who had been pounding away at her keyboard in furious silence, finally looked up. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing. "I'm in," she whispered. "While they were busy with the fake file, I used Priest's last known credentials to piggyback on their access. I'm inside the Avalon Trust accounting server." She turned her monitor. It wasn't a complex ledger of offshore accounts. It was a simple corporate Excel spreadsheet, a budget proposal. Project Flint Corridor _ACU Phase 1. And under a list of expenses for legal fees, acquisitions, and security, there was one sickening line item. Subline resident relocation costs non-recoverable, $2,500,000. My breath hitched. It was there, in black and white, a $2.5 million budget line for making people disappear. The cold, brutal, administrative language for destroying hundreds of lives. I felt Cassian's hand find mine under the table, his grip ironclad. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a shared, silent vow of cold, unadulterated fury. At that exact moment, the burner phone Oleg had given me buzzed on the table. A new text from an unknown number. "We know you have the real file. They sent amateurs to the chapel. We are not amateurs. You want your people to stay safe. You want your tech nerd back Glassline Pier, midnight, come alone, or the relocation costs get higher." I slid the phone across the table to Cassian. He read it, and his face hardened into a mask of pure granite. "No," he said. The word was absolute. "It's a trap. You're not going." "Of course it's a trap," I said. A strange, cold calm settling over me. The girl from the gala was gone. And it's an invitation. They're demanding I come alone because they believe I'll be alone. They think I'm the weak link. That's our advantage. "Nor, I won't let you." "You won't let me." I stood up, meeting his stormy gaze. "They have Priest. They are actively rounding up families. And they think I'm just a scared girl with a USB drive. We're not going to do what they won't let us do. We're going to do what they expect. We just add a twist." He stood, too, his sheer size towering over me, but I didn't back down. "What twist?" "They want me to come alone, so I will. But we go. 2 as 1, a shadow twin." The plan unspooled in my mind, clear and sharp. I go. I walk onto that pier. I'm the bait. I'll have the USB drives the real one, and the fake honeypot Oleg just used, a shell game. "And me?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're the shadow. Oleg, your schematics of the pier. There's a loading crane. Isn't there?" "High above the dock." Oleg nodded. "That's where you'll be. Cassian, above, unseen." I turned to Yara. "The second I'm in danger, you activate the dead man's switch. The real data goes public, not to the press, to every federal regulator on the eastern seaboard." I looked at Oleg. "And you control the pier, the lights, the power to the crane. When Cassian gives the signal, you turn that pier into daylight or you plunge it into darkness. Whatever he needs." A long, heavy silence filled the room. Cassian stared at me, his gray eyes searching my face, and I saw a shift. He wasn't looking at the woman he'd rescued. He was looking at a partner. "It's a high-stakes play. Noor. They budgeted for human misery. Cassian," I said, my voice cold, "I'm done playing it safe." A slow, dangerous smile touched the corner of his mouth. "All right, Noor, we go to the pier." Glassline Pier was a skeleton jutting out into the black, oily water of the river. The fog was a living thing, thick and cold, muffling sound and swallowing the distant city lights until they were just a dull, jaundiced smear in the sky. It clung to my clothes, damp and chilling, each droplet a tiny weight of dread. My footsteps on the wet, warped planks were the only sound, each one a lonely, deliberate echo in the immense silence. He didn't step out of the shadows formed him. One moment there was only fog, and the next, Dante Crowley was standing there, flanked by 4 men in the familiar, tactical black of compact shield. He wasn't wearing a coat. His suit was perfect, his smile a polished, political weapon. Beside him stood a man in a rumpled blazer, his face pale and nervous, the CIB accomplice, the worm that gave the serpent its veneer of legitimacy. "Nor Avalos," Crowley said, his voice smooth and reasonable, the voice he used to charm donors and disarm journalists. "You have a flair for the dramatic. I'll give you that." He took a step closer. "But did you really think you could hold an entire city's progress hostage to your own misplaced sense of morality?" The cold air burned in my lungs. "You were the one who took it hostage. Mr. Crowley," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You just called it relocation costs." His smile tightened. It didn't reach his eyes. "Details." He gestured, and one of the compact shield men held up a tablet. The screen flickered to life. My heart stopped. It was a live feed, a rooftop across the river. And Yara was there, held between 2 guards, her hands bound behind her back with thick white zip ties. Her face was a mask of cold fury, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Our plan, my plan, had been so arrogant. We had prepared for a confrontation. We hadn't prepared for them to be everywhere at once. Guilt, sharp and sickening, twisted in my gut. This was my fault. "As I said," Crowley continued, his voice dropping, the friendly politician vanishing completely, replaced by something cold and hard. "Details. We have your strategist. We have your hacker, and now we have you." He nodded to one of his men. "On your knees." The guard shoved me forward, forcing me to my knees on the rough, splintery wood. Crowley stepped behind me. I felt something cold and impossibly sharp pressing against the nape of my neck. It wasn't a blade. It was too thin. A paper knife, an executive's tool, a weapon of 1,000 tiny, bloodless cuts. It was about humiliation, not violence. "The USB, Nor," he said, his voice a low whisper in my ear. "The real one, or your friend learns how to fly." "Don't do it, Nor!" Yara's voice, tinny and defiant, shouted from the tablet. "That's enough." A voice like rolling thunder cut through the fog. Cassian. He stepped out from the deep shadow beneath the massive, skeletal loading crane, a place of pure darkness. He wasn't hiding. He had been waiting. He held a handgun, but it was pointed at the deck, a tool not yet in use. Crowley laughed. "The boogeyman himself, Cassian Arcole, come to save the day." He pressed the paper knife harder against my skin. "You're too late." Cassian's eyes found mine. They were black holes in the fog, devoid of light, filled with a storm of fury I had never seen before. He looked at Yara on the screen, then back at me, and he had made a promise. No one else gets hurt. With a slow, deliberate movement that screamed of self-loathing, he tossed his weapon. It skidded across the wet planks, a dull, metallic sound of absolute surrender, and came to rest near Crowley's polished shoes. Crowley's smile was triumphant. He kicked the gun into the dark water. Then he pulled a small speaker from his pocket and clicked it on. It crackled to life, amplifying his voice across the pier. "Let the city of Greybridge hear," he announced, his voice booming artificially in the fog. "Tonight, the forces of order have cornered the criminal Cassian Arcole. See your dark hero, the man who operates in the shadows, on his knees before the rule of law." My blood ran cold. He was live streaming. He wasn't just winning, he was rewriting the entire story. He was painting Cassian as the villain, himself as the hero, and me as the criminal's accomplice. The audio feed from his speaker suddenly dissolved into a burst of high-pitched static. A new voice, garbled and frantic, cut through for a handful of seconds. It was Priest. "Trap. On the backup. Chan." Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by Crowley's smug pronouncements, a desperate, failed warning from a ghost. "The drive, Nor," Crowley demanded. My hand was shaking. This was it, the moment of defeat. I pulled the real USB from my pocket, the one containing the legal time bomb. the key to the Urban Equality Commission. I held it out. A guard snatched it from my hand and gave it to Crowley. He looked at it, then at me, then at Cassian. He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "You really thought this would work?" He gave a sharp single nod. The world exploded in white light. A flare gun. The guard next to him had fired it straight up into the fog. It was a sun, a magnesium white sun that burned out my vision, leaving dancing, blinding spots. A deafening crack echoed across the water. In the disorienting, strobing aftermath, chaos erupted. I heard shouts, the powerful roar of a speedboat's engine starting up. Crowley and his men were vanishing into the fog. I scrambled to my feet, my vision slowly returning through the fading white spots. I saw a scene of pure disaster. Oleg, who must have been positioned nearby, was stumbling, clutching his shoulder where shrapnel from the flare had hit him, on the tablet, which had been dropped and now lay screen up on the pier. The image was tilted and swaying wildly. In the confusion, Yara's guards had let go. She had slipped on the wet roof. She was dangling, her hands still bound, holding onto the ledge by her fingertips. Cassian was already moving. He launched himself across the pier, a desperate, impossible sprint. He reached the edge just as Yara's grip failed. He lunged, his body halfway over the abyss, and caught her, not by the hand, by the thin, cutting plastic of the zip tie around her wrists. He let out a guttural roar of effort, his muscles straining, the veins standing out on his neck. He was holding her entire weight, the zip tie digging into his fingers. He was the only thing between her and the black, churning water below. The speedboat's engine faded into the distance. Crowley was gone. The USB was gone. Priest was gone. The narrative was twisted into a lie, and Cassian was about to fail. I saw his arms shaking, his knuckles white, the fabric of his shirt stretched taut across his back, the muscles underneath screaming with a strain they couldn't possibly hold. I saw the moment his grip began to slip. And in that instant, I understood the deepest, most primal fear of my life. It wasn't Compact Shield. It wasn't Dante Crowley. It was this: watching the one person who had taught me how to trust again be torn apart because of me. My mind went blank, and instinct took over. The leather belt around my waist, I unbuckled it, my fingers fumbling. I looped one end around a thick iron mooring cleat bolted to the pier. Pulling it tight, I scrambled over to Cassian, wrapping the other end around his straining forearm, creating a crude, makeshift anchor, a lever. "Pull!" I screamed over the wind, my voice raw. "Now!" He seemed to find a new reservoir of strength, with a low, animalistic roar that was torn from the very depths of his soul. He heaved. I threw my entire body weight back, pulling on the belt, adding my meager strength to his. The shirt across his shoulders ripped, the sound a sharp tear in the night. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, inch by agonizing inch, he dragged Yara up over the edge of the pier. She collapsed onto the wood, gasping and shivering. Safe. Cassian fell back beside her, his chest heaving, his arm bleeding where the zip tie had sliced into his hand. In the distance, a siren began to wail. Hope, faint and foolish, flickered in my chest. Police, fire department, someone. But the sound was wrong. It was a repeating, electronic pattern. It got louder, then stopped abruptly. Fake, another part of the script, another ghost to make us scatter. The pier was suddenly completely silent, except for the sound of our ragged breathing and the gentle lap of water against the pilings. "All is lost," the words echoed in the empty space in my head. We had lost everything. I went to him. I knelt on the wet, cold wood, my hand trembling, went to his cheek. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me, his gray eyes bottomless pits of exhaustion and defeat. And the dam broke. The tears I had refused to shed in the restroom, in the bunker, on the rooftop, finally came. A hot, silent, unstoppable flood. I leaned forward, wrapping my arms around his neck, and buried my face in his torn, damp shirt. And for the first time in front of anyone, I cried. The tears I shed on Cashin's shoulder were a saltwater purge. They were the last gasp of the terrified intake clerk I used to be. By the time Oleg had us bundled into another anonymous van, the grief had cooled, hardening into a quiet, clean, and diamond-hard rage. We didn't go back to the tea house. We didn't go underground. We went up. Misty Gate, Oleg called it. It was a long-defunct university observatory on one of the highest hills overlooking Greybridge, a concrete dome filled with the ghosts of old technology. It was a place to see, not to hide. The mood was bleak. Yara was pacing, her face pale, her fury a low-level hum that made the air vibrate. Oleg was in a corner, hissing as Cassian, with a surprising gentleness, taped a thick bandage to his shoulder where the flare shrapnel had grazed him. Priest was there, huddled under 3 blankets and shivering, a dark bruise blooming on his cheekbone. Oleg's backup team had found him, left for dead in the van when Crowley's team fled the chapel. "He won!" Yara finally spat, the words tearing out of her. "It's over, Cassian. Crowley has the drive. He has everything." "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. They all stopped. They all looked at me. "He has a drive. He has the clean file, the one we built for the Urban Equality Commission, the legal time bomb." Cassian paused, the medical tape in his hand, his eyes, which had been dark with defeat, sharpened, finding mine. The bait. "He thinks he has the weapon," I said, walking to the center of the room. "He thinks he has the file that exposes his entire operation, and he'll spend the next 12 hours tearing it apart, trying to find a kill switch. He'll be so busy disarming the bomb, he won't see the scalpel." I reached down to the heavy leather belt I still wore, the one I had used to brace Cassian. I ran my thumb along a reinforced seam on the inside, pulled a thread, and slid out a tiny, wafer-thin micro SD card, which I then slotted into a waiting USB adapter. The real drive, the nail file. "He played his hand," I said, holding it up. "He showed us exactly what he's afraid of the truth going public, framed as a lie, his live stream, painting you as the villain. That was his mistake. He thinks he's controlling the narrative. So, we'll reverse it. We're going to use the system he corrupted to evict his lies, permanently." Priest, his voice hoarse, looked up from his laptop. "Noor, I've been running recovery diagnostics on the data from that file. There's metadata here I missed. An encrypted validation stamp." His fingers flew, decrypting the string. His eyes went wide. "It's a checksum. It matches the primary authentication protocol for the Urban Equality Commission's annual audit." I felt the tumblers of a massive lock click into place in my mind. "The audit," I whispered. "The plan forming, whole and perfect. It's the one day a year the UEC auditors physically plug their terminals into the CIB mainframe. They do it to check for the exact kind of data manipulation we found. For those few hours, the highest level firewalls are lowered for maintenance." Yara was already at my side, the defeat vanishing from her face, replaced by a cold, tactical fire. "It's a digital keyhole," she breathed. "If we plug this drive into that terminal during the audit window, it won't just be a complaint," Priest finished, a wild grin spreading across his bruised face. "The validation stamp will force the system to accept the file as authentic. It will merge our data with the official city record. It becomes undeniable, irreversible." "When?" Cashin's voice was a low rumble. He had stepped back, his presence a solid wall of support, no longer a shield in front of me. "Tomorrow," Priest said, his voice gaining strength. 1400 to 1600, at the Greybridge East Wing, CIB Data Nexus. The room was silent. Cassian looked at his team, at the wounded, the betrayed, the exhausted, then his gaze settled on me, and it was filled with a new, profound respect. "This is your world, Noor, policy, leverage, evidence. We've been playing my game, Shadows and Force. Now, we play yours." He gave a single, sharp nod. "Give us our orders." I took a deep breath. The clerk was gone. "All right, here's what we do. Yara, you and I are on the data." Priest, you're on the delivery system. Oleg, you're on the narrative. The rest of the night was a blur of frantic, focused work. Yara and I didn't just have a spreadsheet, we built the witness map. It's not enough to show the numbers, I argued, pacing the cold observatory floor. We have to show the faces. We attach Mrs. Petrova's name and her photo to that relocation cost budget line. We take the timestamp from her 50 a.m. eviction and lay it directly over the timestamp of the money transfer from Sable Meridian to the Avalon Trust. We make it human. We make it impossible to ignore. While we built the map, Priest built the weapon. If this works, he muttered, his fingers a blur, the data will be real, but it will still be locked inside the CIB server. We need a way to get it out. He coded for hours, building what he called the Cana Gate. It's not a website, he explained, his eyes burning with a feverish light. It's a decentralized mirror, 1,000 anonymous nodes, all listening. The second that file authenticates on the CIB server, the gate opens. It will copy the entire witness map and distribute it. They can't shut it down. They can't unplug it. The truth will be everywhere, instantly. A map is silent, Oleg said from his corner, his shoulder patched. We need a voice, a choir. He was on his phone, not with shadows, but with community leaders, tenant association presidents, church pastors, the storytellers, he called them. The second Cana Gate opens. They get the link, not the press, not us, the people. They will be our front page. They will tell their own story. There was one last piece, the most important one. Cassian drove me. We didn't speak. The sun was just beginning to stain the sky a pale, bruised purple. We pulled up outside St. Lamb's house. It was no longer just a shelter. It was the heart of the resistance. Mother Saria met us at the door. She was a woman who looked like she was carved from old, strong wood. I explained the plan. I explained the witness map. I explained that we needed their permission to use their faces, their stories, to make them the face of this fight. It's dangerous, I warned. Crowley will know who you are. Mrs. Petrova stepped out from the crowd of residents gathered in the hallway, her gnarled hands, the ones that had twisted a damp handkerchief in my office, took mine. They were steady now. You promised you would help. Child, she said, her voice clear and strong. We did not survive war and poverty and displacement just to be quiet when we finally had a voice. Let them see us. Let them hear us. I was laughing, but tears were streaming down my face. They weren't tears of fear or of loss. They were tears of rage and hope and a terrible, beautiful strength. We sat in the van, parked on the ridge, looking down at the Flint River. The city was laid out before us like a map of glittering possibilities, the weight of what we were about to do, the sheer, audacious gamble, settled between us. His hand found mine in the pre-dawn dark. It wasn't the tentative question on my knee or the grounding grip at the table. It was a partnership, his fingers laced with mine. He'll be there, Cassian said, his voice quiet. Crowley, he'll be at the East Wing. He'll be overseeing the audit personally to make sure his CIB lackeys bury anything suspicious. I know, I whispered. He turned on the bench seat, facing me. His face was all shadows and angles in the dim light, but his eyes, his gray eyes caught the faint, distant glow of the city, and they were fixed on me. If the worst happens today, nor if it goes wrong, I need you to know. You did the best thing. You did what my sister never had the chance to do. You fought back. You made them listen. We're not going to fail, I said, my voice thick. We've already won. They just don't know it yet. I know, he murmured. I leaned in, and so did he. This wasn't the gentle, questioning kiss from the rooftop. This was an affirmation. This was a promise. It was deep and sure, and edged with a desperation for the after. It was a kiss that burned away the last of my fear. His hand came up, not to my jaw, but to the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to him, as if he could pour his own strength into me. It was a promise of life, a defiant, silent vow that we would see the other side of this. We broke apart, both of us breathless. We had to. The fire was too much. A nova we had to contain to save for when this was over. At 1350, I was a different woman. I was dressed in unremarkable business casual, my hair in a neat bun. I looked like one of the hundreds of mid-level bureaucrats that flowed in and out of the Graybridge East Wing every day. My heart was a quiet, steady drum. I walked through the glass doors, the earpiece in my ear a tiny, secret connection. "I'm in the lobby," I murmured. "We read you," Yara's voice came back, crisp and clear from the command van parked 3 blocks away. "Oleg is on the street, southeast corner. I have the building's internal schematics live." "Priest." "Cana Gate is prepped and listening. Noor, just waiting for the handshake. T-minus 10 minutes. "Cassian," I whispered, needing to hear his voice. "I'm your anchor," he replied, his voice a low, steady rumble that grounded me. "Just outside the main plaza, by the fountain. They won't see me, but I see you. You are not alone." I bypassed the main elevators, my heels clicking on the polished marble. I went to the service corridor, just as the blueprint had shown. A high-security key-card lock. I pulled out the heavy, blank metal card he had given me an eternity ago in a hotel restroom. If we get separated, the emergency doors will recognize it. I pressed it to the scanner. A soft beep. The light flashed green. The lock clicked open. I slipped into the quiet, humming hallway. I'm in the corridor. "Proceed to the 3rd floor, East Submatrix." Yara guided. "The audit room." I found it, a glass-walled server nexus. Cold and bright. Through the glass, I could see them 3 UEC auditors, their backs to me, their terminals plugged into the main access port. "I'm at the port," I whispered, my hand closing around the USB drive in my pocket, the real one. 2 minutes. Priest's voice was tight. "They're lowering the internal firewall for the diagnostic. Now." I slid the drive into an open, high-priority port. A bank of server lights flickered from steady green to a rapid, pulsing amber. "Handshake accepted." Priest breathed, his voice tight with disbelief. "It's... holy hell, it's working. The file is authenticating." In my ear, I heard the frantic, joyful clatter of his keyboard. "The Cana Gate is open," he whispered, his voice full of a terrible, beautiful awe. "We are in. The map is flowing. The truth is out." The moment the Cana Gate opened, it wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a deep, seismic hum that vibrated up from the polished floor of the East Wing, through the soles of my shoes, and into my bones. It was the sound of 1,000 locks clicking open at once, of a digital dam breaking. In my ear, Priest's breathless whisper was a prayer. "It's live, Noor. It's everywhere." Across the city, in the pre-dawn gloom of the Flint River corridor, phones began to chime, a single shared notification, a link, and then a map. Not a map of streets, but of injustices, a constellation of red dots, each one a home, a life, a family. Tapping a dot brought up a face, Maria Petrova, evicted 5:14 a.m. Tapping her face brought up the forged court order. Tapping the order brought up the direct money trail to the Avalon Trust. It wasn't just data. It was a story. Their story. And for the first time, they were the ones telling it. A chime sounded from the elevators at the end of the hall. The polished steel doors slid open. But it wasn't the building's morning security team. It was a dozen figures in tactical gear, their vests emblazoned with 3 stark, white letters. BEC, Bureau of Evidence Control. It sounded official. It sounded legitimate. And walking calmly in their center, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, was Dante Crowley. "He's here." I breathed into my mic. "He's not running. He's come to unplug us." "They'll declare the Nexus a compromised crime scene." Yara's voice crackled, sharp with urgency. "They'll seize the servers to preserve evidence and wipe them clean. You have to get out of there, Noor, now." I didn't need to be told. I pulled the USB drive. My only crime, from the port and bolted, I ran, not toward the elevators, but deeper into the building. Up the emergency stairs, my heels slipped on the concrete, my breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. 7th floor, Yara guided, her voice a lifeline. There's a maintenance corridor that connects to the north tower. I burst through the door onto the 7th floor. It was a long, silent hallway of executive suites, the deep blue carpet swallowing the sound of my frantic footsteps. I heard them behind me, the heavy, rhythmic pounding of their boots, the clipped commands crackling over their radios. I was a fox, and the hounds were closing in. I saw the corridor at the far end of the hall, but between me and it, another set of elevator doors chimed open. 2 more BIC agents stepped out, cutting off my escape. I was trapped. My eyes darted around, looking for an exit, a hiding place. There was only one door. A restroom. The cosmic, cruel irony of it was a physical blow. I threw myself inside, the door sighing shut behind me. I twisted the heavy lock, my hands shaking. I backed away until I hit the cold marble of the far wall, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath a useless, shallow thing. The circle had closed. I was right back where I started, a scared girl, hiding in a bathroom, waiting for the monsters to break down the door. I heard their boots stop outside, the crackle of a radio. She's in here, 7th floor, executive lounge. Time seemed to stretch, to warp. Each second was an eternity. This was it. This was how it ended. Then a sound cut through my terror. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the angry banging of a tactical team. It was measured, deliberate, familiar, a promise. A voice, not from my earpiece, but a low, real rumble through the solid wood of the door. Open the door, Nor. It was Cassian. This time we knock louder than they do. Tears of sheer, incredulous relief sprang to my eyes. I stumbled to the door and fumbled with the lock. I threw it open. He was a whirlwind of dark, controlled motion. He wasn't dressed for stealth. He was dressed for war. In a simple black shirt and dark pants, a statement of intent. He pushed something heavy and black into my hand. It was a featureless box, cool to the touch. "A quorum key," he said, his voice urgent. "Priest built it. It's a legal dead man's switch. Plug it into any auxiliary port in the server nexus. If they cut the power, if they try to wipe the system, this key will trigger a forced, decentralized backup. It will copy everything to the 1,000 nodes Priest set up for the Cana Gate. They won't just fail to kill the data. They'll make it immortal." He put his hand on the small of my back. "We move now." We burst out into the hallway. The BEC agents were startled, not expecting a confrontation. Cassian wasn't trying to fight them. He was a force of nature, a river carving its way through stone. He held up a soft, flexible shield I hadn't even seen him carrying, deflecting a stun baton with a sharp crackle of electricity. He wasn't an attacker. He was a protector. He was clearing a path. "The auxiliary audit room," he yelled over the chaos. "To your left, go." I saw it, another glass-walled room, smaller than the main nexus. I slid on the polished floor, the momentum carrying me through the door. I scrambled to the main console. My eyes scanning for a port, I found one, slammed the quorum key home, and a single, brilliant green light on the box flashed once. The insurance policy was active. The BEC agents recovered, blocking the doorway, their weapons raised. We were trapped. Dante Crowley stepped through their ranks, his face a thundercloud of rage. He raised a bullhorn to his lips. "You think you've won?" his voice boomed, echoing through the cavernous lobby below. "Little girl, thinking you can save the world with a stolen piece of hardware." This was it, the narrative, his final move. "Activating the curtain," Yara's voice said calmly in my ear. In the grand 3-story atrium of the East Wing, the massive digital displays that usually showed stock tickers and corporate logos flickered. They went black for a single, dramatic second, then white text began to scroll up the black screens, slow, silent, and undeniable. Maria Petrova, age 82, evicted 5:14 a.m. The Gable family, 2 adults, 3 children, evicted 4:50 a.m. The Ortega family, 4 adults, 1 infant, evicted 5:02 a.m. Hundreds of names, an endless, scrolling testament to his crimes, the witness map, made real. I saw a desk microphone in the audit room, its on-air light glowing. I lunged for it, hitting the broadcast button that linked to the building's PA system. My voice, clear and steady, echoed through the halls. I didn't save anyone. Mr. Crowley, I just opened a door. They are walking through it themselves. Priest, Cashin murmured into his own mic. Light it up. The security camera feeds throughout the building. The ones broadcasting to the news vans outside suddenly changed. Crowley's enraged face on the lobby monitors was replaced by the live, resolute face of Mrs. Petrova, broadcast from a makeshift studio at St. Lamb's house. She wasn't crying. She was telling her story. Her feed was replaced by Mr. Gable, holding his sleeping child, his voice shaking with a rage he had suppressed for weeks. A chorus of the displaced, their faces filling every screen, their voices telling a single, unified story of corruption and greed. The local news crews, who had been held back by the BEC cordon, saw it. They had their story. They surged forward, a wave of cameras and microphones. The BEC agents faltered. They were grunts, not fanatics. They looked at each other, their weapons held a little lower. This wasn't the simple smash and grab they had been promised. They were on the wrong side of history, and the whole city was watching. A woman stepped forward from their ranks. Her uniform was cleaner, her posture more certain. She removed her helmet. "Inspector Juno Vass," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. She looked not at us, but at Crowley. "My orders were to secure federal evidence, sir, not to participate in its destruction. We are not burning any more files today." The tide had turned. Crowley saw it. The trap had closed around him. He spun around, making a break for his private keycard access elevator. But Cassian was there. He moved from the audit room door to the elevator in 3 long, silent strides, blocking Crowley's path. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke, and his words were quiet, almost gentle. A poison dart of a secret I didn't understand. "Lena sends her regards." Crowley froze, all the color drained from his face. The name, Lena, Cassian's sister, shattered his composure in a way that tactical teams and data breaches never could. It was a ghost from a past crime, a personal sin, and in his eyes, I saw not the fury of a thwarted kingpin, but the pure, primal terror of a man whose deepest secret had just been laid bare. Inspector Vass was there a second later. "Dante Crowley," she said, her voice like iron. "You're under arrest." The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. The aftermath was a storm, a hurricane of flashing camera lights, of reporters shouting questions, of stunned officials trying to take control. But in the absolute center of that swirling chaos, there was a pocket of impossible, perfect silence. It was just me and Cassian. The world and its noise faded away to a dull, distant roar. He stood in front of me, his chest rising and falling, the adrenaline of the fight slowly leaving him. The storm in his gray eyes had finally passed, and the water was calm. My hand, of its own accord, rose. It wasn't shaking. I laid my palm against his cheek, the rough stubble a grounding. Real sensation. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch. And for the first time since I'd huddled in a restroom stall in the Halcyon Crown, I took a full, deep, shuddering breath. It didn't catch in my throat. It didn't burn in my lungs. It was clean. It was free. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was here. And we had won. The storm broke. But it didn't pass. It transformed. The Cana Gate didn't just leak the truth. It became a permanent, public archive of it, an indelible scar on the city's conscience. The witness map became the official record, faced with irrefutable, citizen-verified data. The system had no choice but to bend. The fraudulent evictions were nullified by court order. The Avalon Trust's assets were frozen, its vast network of shell companies collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. The old world crumbled, and in its place, something new began to grow. Inspector Juno Vass, true to her word, led a ruthless, top-to-bottom purge of the Civil Integrity Bureau, cutting out Crowley's rot with surgical precision. Compact Shield had its corporate charter and operating license permanently revoked. And the Velasca Consortium? It simply ceased to be in its place. Cassian established the Velasca Eves Fund, a fully legal, heavily endowed foundation dedicated to providing pro bono legal services for housing disputes. The shadows he once commanded were repurposed, his network of information now used to find families who had fallen through the cracks, to offer help before they even knew they needed it. He was still a protector, but he was trading his weapons for law books. I found my own place in the new landscape. I became the first data transparency coordinator for the newly formed Flint Community Alliance. My job was to take the tool we built, the Cana Gate, and make it a permanent fixture of city governance, ensuring that no one could ever again weaponize the fine print against the vulnerable. At night, I took classes in urban policy, learning how to build a better system from the ground up, not just expose a broken one. 6 months after the storm, a soft rain was falling on the city. It was a cleansing, quiet sound on the windows of Cassian's new venture. He had opened a small shop in a quiet neighborhood called Mint and Ember. The front was an elegant, modern tea house. The back, however, was a bustling community law clinic where he and a team of young, idealistic lawyers taught people how to fight back with contracts and codes instead of whispers and fear. That night, the shop was closed, the chairs were stacked, the lights were low, and a soft, instrumental track was playing from a small speaker on the counter. Cassian held out his hand to me. I took it. We danced. There in the empty space between the tables, our movements slow and easy, a silent conversation. His hand rested on the small of my back, a familiar, comforting weight. The frantic, desperate rhythm our hearts once shared had settled into a calm, steady beat. He leaned down, and the kiss was as soft as the rain outside. It was deep and warm, and it held no fear, no desperation, only a profound, quiet certainty. It lingered, a slow burn